Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a frontline update for the 26th of January 2023. Let's get straight to it and we'll go to our northeastern sector, the Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna front line, where it's been fairly quiet. A few things to note. Warehouse blown up in Kupiansk, constantly under shelling. Russians claiming that there have been sabotage groups, Ukrainian sabotage groups operating in Vilshana and Berestova, which is further down here, there in Berestova, and that's or near there, so going towards the Russians here. Kuzmivka, Novoselivska, the Russians are saying that they are chewing up forces there, type thing, but also claiming that Rebar, let's have a look at Rebar, pro-Russian source. In the Kupiansk sector, no significant changes in the Svatove sector. Ukrainian commanders gathering armor and men to attack Kuzmivka. In the Liman sector, that's further down south, precisely, artillery strikes are preventing the enemy from digging in between Makivka and Dubrova, so they say. The ISW says a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are concentrating forces in Kupiansk and Dvorichna to conduct further offensive operations near Svatove. So this is, varied claims that the Ukrainians are concentrating forces both in this area as well as in the Kuzmivka area, and it's all about eventually taking Svatove. So various claims, but nothing unusual. Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces dislodged Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups south of Kreminna and gained a foothold near the Svirsky Donets River. Another mill blogger posted footage on January the 25th of bars. That's a combat reserve personnel performing a combat mission in the Kreminna area and claimed that they were under constant Ukrainian sniper fire. This is the idea that, in fact, around the Kreminna area, there is very close fighting and a lot of it. So if we come down here, we're passing the normal places of Makivka to Ploshchanka. Andrew Perpetua, who's done a bit of mapping in the last few days, has said actually there's a lot more grey area, done some geolocation in the Ploshchanka area. They're saying that there's a lot more grey area there than he had previously believed. I talked about how there's this high ground between these sort of gullies that Rebar keep talking about that the Russians have control of. So I think the Russians have got some kind of existence here on this high ground, but then Andrew Perpetua seems to think this is all pretty much grey area or grey zone. Sorry. As we come down, repelled attacks around Chivona Popivka, all the kind of normal stuff. Ukrainian forces have likely made advances around Kreminna, says ISW, as of the 25th of January. Combat footage published on the 23rd of January and geolocated on the 24th shows Ukrainian forces ambushing a Russian airborne force convoy east of Dubrova and on an unspecified date. The footage indicates that Ukrainian forces are likely made advances west of Dubrova. Not quite sure how that works. Other geolocated combat footage posted on January the 23rd and 24th indicates Ukrainian forces have also likely made advances south of Kreminna, and the Ukrainian forces have been conducting HIMARS strikes in Kreminna and Rubizhna. Okay, let's put that all into context. So as we come further down towards Kreminna, here we have Kreminna and Rubizhna over there. There's been HIMARS strikes. Get that away from my head. HIMARS strikes in Rubizhna and Kreminna. Fighting is at close quarters all around this forested area. Geolocated footage of a convoy being ambushed to the east of Dubrova, and this indicates advances to the west as well. So I've got Dubrova still as grey zone. It's been swapping hands quite consistently over the last few months. I think the Russians probably do have a bit more control over this area, the forest near the Sversky Donets River. So like Andrew Perpetua, I've increased the Russian control there. It's not that they've gained that, just to make it more accurate. And this is probably where the Ukrainians are. There's fighting around Bilarivka still. As we start moving south. Defmon has an intuition of the area, says if you repulse an attack in the area of Bilarivka, I get a gut feeling the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back just slightly around Kreminna. I can't explain why. Possibly it's just a lack of information, so that is complete hearsay. But there was talk about how Ukraine were really making gains around Kreminna, and then that's gone a little bit quiet, and then it seems that a lot of mappers are starting to move Russian control, or at least claim Russian claims and geolocated footage to having them a little bit further to the west. So, yeah, not quite sure what's going on in Kreminna, what the objectives are exactly, and why it is taking it's taking the Ukrainians a lot longer, because actually the Russians have reinforced this area quite a bit, so they're obviously expecting this to be an attack. And then there was talk about whether this is going to be the scene of a Russian offensive itself. Anyway, let's continue down the front line. In one of my normal Columbo moments, just before we go down, one more thing, Mum. I mentioned HIMARS hitting Kreminna. It was a music school in Kreminna. This was as a result, apparently. Well, coincidentally, 2 days ago, a Wagner Telegram channel posted pictures of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division troops in front of the same buildings the local music school struck by the reported HIMARS, geolocated. So this is the danger of posting stuff on Telegram and other social media. So Wagner posted this about the regular Russian army there, and you can geolocate those buildings behind, which someone did. There you go. Normal bit of geolocation took place on the 23rd, and then lo and behold, that's then struck a couple of days later. So, yeah, the dangers of social media and that kind of activity. Right, as we genuinely move on down, we're going to go to Spirina next, which is a failed Russian attack. The Ukrainian army destroyed 4 BMP-2 IFVs and a BTR-82A APC on the south of Spirina front, Donetsk Oblast. And here you see that. So when you hear about these high numbers of APCs and IFVs destroyed each day, so 50 over the last 2 days, here's a bunch just taking place in Spirina. It's just one example along a very long front line. So that has been geolocated to around the Spirina area. Don't know exactly where. I mean, I could find out for you fairly easily, but there you go. You got a couple of bits of water there in the Spirina area. I'm not quite sure exactly where that is, but basically that's obviously around here somewhere. And that is, in fact, I'm going to go and find out where that is. Okay, I've located that. So as we come into Spirna, we have some water, some settlement going off there, and then we have a very straight, long mud track coming down there that veers off and goes down there with trees all along. If it was not wintertime and then been all blown up, as we look here, we have some water features. The settlement going off there, very long straight line coming down here, and then coming off here with these would be trees, and they would be trees. And we have the vehicles blown up around there. So these vehicles are blown up around here. So there, as that sort of comes around the corner there, that is that very long straight road or mud track that leads back up to Spirna and the water feature there. Anyway, that's where they've been blown up. So some a counterattack or an attack repelled around Spirna. Then we get on to the Bakhmut area in general. So when it comes to the claims around Bakhmut, interesting that it's quieting down a little bit. It's not good news at all for the Ukrainians, as they're under increasing pressure around there. But Bakhmut area remains the epicenter of combat operations, says the ISW. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces only conducted assaults on 3 settlements in the wider Bakhmut area, which is markedly less than in previous days. And that Rebar really only says this about the whole of the Bakhmut area. North of Bakhmut, heavy fighting continues near Krasnohora and Avdivka. In Bakhmut, Wagner assault units are fighting near the meatpacking plant in the northeast. Ukrainian commanders bringing in reinforcements, and we'll come on to the south in a little while. We've got Suryat maps saying that the Russian army and DPR, never mentioned Wagner, forces took control over the northern fortifications of Krasnohora and Kupiansk railway station, while at the same time troops began attacking the first areas of Kavivka town from the south. So there is still your continued pressure. It just seems to be a little bit less than on previous days. So just to give you the context there, no doubt there is, skirmishing going on Vesely Roslivka, Krasnopolivka, although those names don't really turn up today on Blahodotne. It's about Krasnohora. I've shown a little bit of increase in the Russian presence here in the north of Krasnohora. They are sort of getting closer and closer to capturing the village, and then it's moving on to Paraskevivka. The claim there is that this is the first time they've really sort of fighting on the southern outskirts of Paraskevivka. There is also gains to be had for the Russians around the northern outskirts, just south of Pidorodny, and I'm going to show you in a second. So this is what the map looks like at the moment, and I'm going to change it now to show you what the Russian gains appear to be. So really, this area here now under Russian control. Debate over this area. Some mappers have that Russian control, some don't. And in fact, the same goes for this plant there. I'm not exactly sure what that is. But yeah, so that may or may not be under Russian control. So the Russians are advancing in this northeastern area. I haven't heard too much on the eastern outskirts again and Opitny, quite for a couple of days in terms of news. When it comes to Klishchivka, no reports now says that Klishchivka is in control of the Russians and that the high ground just to the northwest of Klishchivka has indeed been lost. So I got confirmed Klishchivka high ground is lost. That means that I presume, all of those entrenchments will be lost as well, and they are pretty extensive. They might well be some of them that might still be controlled by Ukrainians, but I'm not sure. I would have thought they might well have pulled out and are just hammering that with artillery or such like. So really, the Ukrainian lines are going to look something like this. If I was to change them, they are no longer, I think everyone now agrees, from all different sort of sides of this conflict, that Russia now are in control of Klishchivka. Now they are apparently conducting attacks to try and cut this road here that goes through Ivaniska, which is one of the main logistical inroads into Bakhmut. So there'll be attacks from here and attacks up here as well, both sides of Klishchivka. It depends how much the Ukrainians are holding on here or hemming them back. I don't know whether they'll be holding on with troops on the ground, maybe, as I say, still in the trenches to the north there, or whether they are just using artillery to keep the Russians back. But you really, it's so important that they keep the Russians back where they are there, because as soon as they cut this road or get any close to Ivaniska, then that really does put Bakhmut in a lot of danger. So things aren't looking, even though it's a little bit quieter each day, there are incremental gains for the Russians, and the ISW keep talking about whether they are culminating or not, and I'll go on to give a little bit of analysis at the end of this. It's not obviously not looking good for Bakhmut. As Defmon says, according to Deep State's daily report yesterday, so Deep State map, pro-Ukrainian fighting is still going on in Klishchivka. I think this is possible, at least in the area of. So who knows? There's fighting going on there, quite possibly. What that fighting looks like, not too sure. Okay, we're going to go down south to Avdivka. There is just fighting all over the front lines. Okay, let's zoom out, pop down here. Now, there are continued repelled attacks in the area of Novobakhmutivka, Krasnohorivka, just north of Avdivka. And in fact, Avdivka itself is being quite heavily shelled. So, oops, wrong one. Here we go. Tim White says some photos now taken earlier today in Avdivka. The Ukraine held town was hit by heavy shelling today, and an apartment block was targeted. So there you go. That's Avdivka. You can imagine there are people still living in Avdivka, very much in basements, surviving on meager resources and whatnot. Goodness knows why they haven't evacuated, but that's how some people operate. And there has been gains for the Russians in Vodyane area. So Andrew Perpetua says near Avdivka and Pisky, I marked Russian expansion of control. It's really sad and pathetic how many casualties they took achieving this, like dozens and dozens of armored vehicles. We've seen a lot of footage regarding some of those. Also, this area of control might be too liberal. Some of this might still be contested. So he has the Vodyane going on to Opitny there area and has Russian control up to the start of that large stretch of water there. So he has Russian control up to there. I've been sort of waiting just to see what turns out here because there's quite a few claims about Vodyane. Vodyane is important as well, not just for the surrounding of Avdivka, but for Pervomaisky. So if Vodyane loses and they can advance along here, you can flank Pervomaisky, and Pervomaisky has been this Pisky Pervomaisky axis there. It's been a really difficult area for the Russians to really get a foothold in and continue advancing. I mean, it's been painfully slow. And then actually they regressed over recent time there. So the Russians were up here, and now they're back there again. But anyway, repelled attacks around Avdivka, but a lot of people, rebar, no reports, not even mentioning anything in the area. Defmon says repelled attacks in those places, and Marinka as well. Marinka not really getting much mention either. And then it comes on. So here, this is that whole Avdivka Marinka section there, just a few lines, and then it comes down to Vuhledar. So we have quite a bit to say about Vuhledar. That is been the scene of quite a bit of activity. So as we come down past Marinka to Vuhledar, essentially what has happened over the last few days is the Russians have made some gains to the west of Mikilska. So they've made some gains here. And indeed, they arguably control this area of incline towards sort of farmlands and settlements to the southeast of Vuhledar. In fact, reporting Ukraine did a whole video on this, that the Russians apparently attacked up here. They did take severe casualties, a lot of losses, but at the same time, they then launched an attack from here. And the idea was that they would be fixing troops and taking advantage in other places, but they also used the thermobaric weapon to flatten whole areas as well. So it's been quite a concerted effort to take Vuhledar, and I don't think, although they might well have control of this area here, in some sense, I don't think they've made huge gains, considering that they have appeared to have lost quite a few troops and pieces of equipment. Let's quickly assess both sides of the claim. So, Rebar says in the Vuhledar sector, Russian forces captured the cottage area in the southeast of Vuhledar. Fighters of the DNR 7th Operational Tactical Formation broke through the enemy defenses and dug in at homes on the edge of the town. Syriac Maps confirms this, or seeks to verify this. The Russian forces launched a new attack towards Vuhledar, thus reaching the farmhouses southeast of the town where clashes are taking place with the Ukrainian army now. Very premature to say Vuhledar is taken by the Russians. You bet your bottom dollar it is premature. I mean, at the very least, the Russians are, or the very most, sorry, the Russians are here, but some are saying that they've been pushed back. Vuhledar, says Defmon, the AFU repulsed attacks around Vuhledar, and the Russians are using a large amount of assets to try to advance in Vuhledar. They had some success south, but are not in the town. Andrew Perpetua says near Vuhledar, Russia expanded west a bit in the Mikilska dachas and are reportedly in the outskirts of Vuhledar itself. I've heard from multiple sources that Ukraine counterattacked, and one source claims Ukraine pushed Russia all the way back to the eastern parts of the dachas. So, no report says during the day, Russian forces attacked via Pavlivka and Mikilska. Russian forces used TOS 1A in the eastern Mikilska to flatten the area and wipe out Ukrainian troops. The area in the red south of Vuhledar is claimed to be captured by the Russians, unconfirmed, and Russia are not in Vuhledar. So he doesn't have them on the south. There are some that are claiming that they've been pushed back to the eastern outskirts of Mikilska here, or sorry, western outskirts. So there are varying claims. I think the Russians could have some presence here in this southern part of the settlement here. Now the worry is if they can get a foothold, then consolidate on that, then they can push on. And Vuhledar then because they haven't had this previously, and Vuhledar has been the scene of quite a lot of pointless waves of attacks from Pavlivka, and they've been taken out. Finally, they seem to have worked out that hey, you can maybe advance from, you can try, simultaneous attacks from different places, and maybe that's a good thing to do, and rather than just repeated wave after wave after wave after wave, and work out that doesn't quite, it's not quite the cleverest of tactics. So here's Vuhledar, there's Pavlivka, there's Mikilska. Let's look at the topographical map to get some kind of understanding. Vuhledar, Pavlivka, and Mikilska. What the Russians were trying to do is sort of get onto this higher ground from another section, and then take another area, and then take Vuhledar from being on higher grounds, whilst also trying to fix the Ukrainians with a simultaneous assault from Pavlivka. And that seems to have allowed them, as I say, some kind of purchase around here. And if they can consolidate on that today, then actually Vuhledar will be threatened, because they'll be nearby, and it's going to be easier for them to attack from there, from a consolidated position now on the higher ground. It is, yeah, it is a worry. Yes, they have been repelled, but it's not to say that it's all going to be singing and dancing from now on. So Vuhledar is under pressure. Finally, just another view from Tatarigami UA. This is a bit contradictory, in my opinion, of itself. Information about Russian forces setting up a foothold in Vuhledar is part of their psyops. At least 2 enemy units refused to assault after witnessing high casualties from first waves. And then the situation remains difficult. So the enemy had some successes in the Dachi area and tries to establish control there to develop a further attack on the outskirts of Vuhledar. Despite high losses and deserters, the enemy continues to throw assault groups and shell the town. This is where the enemy puts maximum pressure, where I was telling you about, should have specified which Dachi in the previous tweet. So on the one hand, it says this is PSYOPs setting up a foothold, and on the other hand, it says but they are setting up a foothold to do further attacks despite high losses and deserters. So not quite sure. Just watch out. There's stuff happening there. Anyway, as we come further to the, which way is it? West. It appears that so many places are being attacked. So, I mean, look, Brechistivka, Velika Novosilka, Novopil, Poltavka, Drozyanka, Cherivna, Malishibaki, Stepova, and then Kamianske. So as we come along here, that's here, and then moving on to Velika Novosilka here, Novopil around here, just basically Poltavka here, just attacks all going on all over the shop. And then we come on to this area around Orikhiv and Kamianske, which has seen quite a lot of activity over the last few days. Okay, let's get a handle on some of the claims. So ISW says, spokesperson for the Ukrainians, Natalia Humenyuk, stated that the Russian forces are conducting limited attacks with 10 to 15 person groups to undermine Ukrainian defenses and disperse Ukrainian forces across the front line. She also stated that Russian forces are transferring additional reserves to this axis due to heavy losses. Now, the claim was the other day, a guy called, is it Rogov, stating that, Rogov, stating that four towns were taken. And then immediately everyone's piling onto this claim. Rebar said, yep, and supported that. And lots of pro-Russian sources kind of, repeated this claim. But then the Ukrainians like, no, that's not what's happened. And so you've got this kind of fight in the information space as to exactly what's going on. The reality is, I think Lobkove has been lost to the Russians, and Novoprovkovka, although some people say that's been taken back. So there's all these different claims going on. A Russian mill blogger says the ISW claimed that Russian forces have still not taken Kamianske. So then on top of that, there's this claim that Kamianske, which is on the edge of the lake here was taken by the Russians, and then that appears to be walked back somewhat. Still not taking Kamianske, despite forcing Ukrainian forces to withdraw from the settlement. So if we look at Syriac here, Syriac says that the Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from the settlement. There's a bit of a grey zone right across the central part of it. There's a river that goes through here. And that Russia controls the southern part. On the Zaporizhia front, they say Ukrainian army retreated from higher positions inside Kamianske than Russian army hasn't entered yet in the northern part of the town, which is interesting because apparently they did control it, as according to certain claims. So a Russian mill blogger posted drone footage of empty trenches in a small settlement, which a mill blogger claimed is Kamianske, but there's no geolocated data that would confirm this claim. And this Defmon talks about this, which is trenches here. The Russians are still trying to invent a win in Kamianske in Zaporizhia. Showing empty trenches does not mean a thing. It kind of makes sense to hide if a drone appears. I don't know. I don't know what this says. Whether actually if you can't see anyone at all, then it probably is. At least some evidence that the Ukrainians have retreated from there, but that would need to be geolocated. Somebody's probably already done that, but there's lots of claims around all these settlements around here. Rebar doesn't say too much about, I don't think, Kamianske today. It says in the Orikhiv sector, positional fighting and artillery exchanges continue. So really doesn't give any detail anymore. In the Polohi sector, Russian forces carried out reconnaissance by force at Heliopol. The Ukrainian command is bringing in reinforcements to defend. So again, not a lot. So ISW continues. Igor Gherkin, a former Russian militant commander and prominent critical voice in the Russian mill blogger information space, claimed that there's no available data to indicate that Russian forces continued their offensive in Zaporizhia Oblast past the first day of the claimed offensive. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that battles along the Zaporizhia Oblast front line have become positional in nature. That's what you just heard from Rebar. Russian and Ukrainian sources continue to report that Russian forces shelled areas that Rogov previously claimed that Russian forces had captured, including Malatok-Machka, Novandilivka, Novandrivka, Shibaki, and Kamianske. So if they have captured these places, why are they shelling them? We've seen this before up in the Svatove Kreminna front line. The claims that they take a place, but then they end up shelling it the next day. Well, if you've taken it, you wouldn't be shelling it because you'd have your troops there. Anyway, so again, my map hasn't changed. Particularly, I've made a couple of minor adjustments, but you've got Ukrainian claims, Russian claims, and truth is probably somewhere in the middle, or at least over towards the Ukrainian lines. I don't think the Russians have made the advances they initially claimed, and you can see that because the Russians are disagreeing with themselves. Now, apparently, there are skirmishes going on up and down the Dnieper River. I showed you that nighttime attack, the special forces attack. There is still your normal stuff going on here in terms of shelling, but there's fighting over Potemkin Island still ongoing, which is just south of Kherson. And other than that, fairly quiet there. We'll see how the saturation missile attacks turn out. And the last thing I was going to talk to you about was just the initial analysis from ISW, which is, I think, worth mentioning here. So as you've seen from the front line, I left this to the end because you've now seen that actually the front line is active in a load of places. Well, really, yes, maybe Kherson a little bit, the Dnieper River a little bit, but from Kamianske all the way up to Kupiansk, we are seeing activity, but particularly increased activity in around Avdivka area and the Zaporizhia and southern Donetsk area. So what is going on? And the ISW says, right, Russian forces may be engaging in limited spoiling attacks across most of the front line in Ukraine in order to disperse and distract Ukrainian forces and set conditions to launch a decisive offensive operation in Luhansk. So they think that's going to be in Luhansk, which is up here. That's their analysis. Russian forces have reinitiated offensive operations, namely limited ground attacks on two main sectors of the front line in the past few days, in central Zaporizhia, along the Kamianske, Mali-Shibaki, Malatok-Machka line, and in Vuhledar area of western Donetsk Oblast. Ukrainian officials have noted these attacks are conducted by small squad-sized assault groups of 10 to 15 people aimed at dispersing Ukrainian defensive lines. The size and nature of these attacks suggest that they are more likely spoiling attacks that seek to distract and pin Ukraine Ukrainian forces against discrete areas of the front than a concerted effort to relaunch offensive operations to gain ground in central Zaporizhia and western Donetsk. These limited attacks are notably ongoing as the pace of Russian operations around Bakhmut, led by the Wagner Group, seems to be decreasing. I this is I, I'm 50-50 about this. So they keep talking about the culmination of the Russian forces in Bakhmut, and yet they are still making gains. Yes, they've lost a lot, and they do seem to be slowing down. But I think they're being supported now by regular Russian forces. Following the Russian capture of Soledar in mid-January, so I think the Wagner forces have culminated, but it doesn't mean the Russian forces necessarily have, so to speak. Following the Russian capture of Soledar in mid-January, the attacks on Bakhmut and surrounding settlements have apparently dropped off, suggesting that the Russian offensive operation in Bakhmut may be culminating. The Wagner Group has failed to deliver on its promise of securing Bakhmut and has been unable to progress beyond minor tactical gains in Soledar and other surrounding small settlements. Russian military leadership may have therefore decided deprioritize operations around Bakhmut after recognizing the low likelihood that Wagner will actually be able to take the settlement. I think it's what's happening around Klishchiivka is super important, and it's going to be about that over the next couple of days. The Russian military appears to be shifting its focus towards conventional forces and away from the non-traditional force structure of the Wagner Group, potentially in preparation for a decisive effort in Luhansk Oblast. And we've seen this in the kind of political movements around, demoting certain leaders like Surovikin, getting rid of the Toplinsky from the Kherson, the VDV. He was in charge of the airborne troops who withdrew from Kherson. He's now been moved, and we've got Gerasimov, another sort of mainstay Russian names, sort of regular army names, being uh, put in place. So I think there is political stuff going on, as well as stuff all up and down the front line. Um, I'll keep you updated, but thank you so much. That's the end of the Frontline update. Please like, subscribe, and share, and check out my Ukraine War Update Extra later. Toodle pips.